from the Peninsula State University, and today we are going to tackle about a very famous poem written by Mr. Dylan Thomas himself called Do Not Go Gentle Unto the Good Night. Again, I am Connor Garcia, and please stay tuned as we dig deeper about this poem and as we explore more of it with today's discussion. Okay, so Do Not Go Gentle Into the Good Night is written by Dylan Thomas and it was first published in 1951 with the son's plea to his dying father. The speaker seeks to show that his father that while all men face the same end, which is of course death, they must fight for life nonetheless. This article includes a discussion of the poem's meaning, examination of its structure and poetic devices, and a look at the author more and about how his life changed and how his life deals with this poem. So to begin with, we have here who is Dylan Thomas. He is a modern period writer and of course just like with a novel, play, or short story, we should always keep first know who is the author. So, Dylan Thomas is definitely a literary figure you should know. He was born in Swansea, Wales in the year 1914, and he began writing poetry at the early age. In fact, many of his famous poems, including the And That Shall Have No Dominion and Before I Was Not, were written when he was still a teenager. In fact, his poetry was so good that it caught the attention of English literary greats like T.S. Eliot, Geoffrey Gregson, and Stephen Spender, who helped him publish his first book of poetry entitled 18 Poems at the age of only 20. So Thomas, unlike other poets, had the fortune of being well known and well acclaimed during his lifetime. So other writers and poets are being considered after their death. So they became famous after their death, and Dylan Thomas didn't uh, have that kind of thing on his year because he was well known and he was so famous. So his poetry collections were critical hits, and he participated in multiple tours, both domestically and internationally. And yet, despite the success of Mr. Dylan Thomas, he found it so difficult to make a living from his poetry alone, since the hardships of being a poet or being a writer is different from the hardships that the writers have experiencing right now. So, along with the securing of the funding and the funding of the wealthy patrons, uh, he began to write and record pieces for BBC Radio, and he performed to BBC radio dramas as well. So Thomas even dabbled in the film and scripted at least five movies, including This Scholar in the year 1942 and Conquest of a Germ in 1944. So despite he is well known and he has written in the books, his success made his personal life prove difficult. He suffered from breathing issues from the childhood and they plagued him throughout his life. So Thomas had married young and his marriage to Caitlin McNamara that was so contentious. Thomas was very heavy drinker and his alcoholism and multiple affairs put a strain in his relationship to his wife. During the American tour in 1953, Thomas started getting sick. So on the night of his 39th birthday, Thomas fell ill and slipped into coma. He passed away a few days later, and the coroner ruled his cause of death as a mixture of fatty liver, which basically came from his heavy drinks, pneumonia, and brain swelling. So, despite passing away at such young age, Thomas is considered to be one of the most influential poets of the modern period, and he is certainly one of the most famous Welsh poets of all time. Okay, so now let's begin watching the poet, uh, the poem "Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night." Please listen. Thank you.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
Okay, thank you for listening. So here is the entire poem, "Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night." Okay, so here is the inspiration of Dylan Thomas in writing this poem. Basically, it is no other than his father, Di- David John Thomas. So the background behind this poem is his father. His father, David John Thomas, had first introduced him to the wonder of language by reading him Shakespeare before bed at night. Thomas' father was a grammar school teacher, but he had always wanted to become a poet, but he was never able to realize it. Some experts suggest that Thomas was inspired to write "Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night" because his father was dying. Though his father, I'm sorry, though his father didn't pass away until Christmas of the year 1952. In a twist of fate, Thomas' poem about death would be one of the last poems he could write before his own untimely demise the following year. So, we already know who is the inspiration of this poem, and let's go deep into the meaning of the Good Night. So, "Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night" is a poem that talks about that basically. So, the narrator of the poem is experiencing the death. of his father, which we see in the last stanza or in the group of lines. Witnessing the death of his father makes the speaker think about death in a more general way. The first five stanzas focus on the different types of men, and the speaker thinks how they will have to face that death one day too. In the end, the speaker realizes that death cannot be avoided, but it can be challenged, just like the repeating lines, do not go gentle into the good night, and rage, rage against the dying of the light. When he tells readers that do not go gentle into the good night and rage against the dying of the light, he is telling them to not accept that passively. Instead, he tells people that the last thing a dying person gets to choose is how he faces death. For Thomas, struggling against death is both a valiant and a human reaction. Once you understand what's happening in the poem, you can start to get to better handle on what "do not go gentle into the good night" means. So now let's take a look closer to what are the themes of this poem and how these themes correlates with the poem itself. So the first theme of the poem is the unstoppable nature of death. So like what we have mentioned earlier, do not go gentle into the good night comes from the experience of watching his father passing away. As a result, the poem's primary purpose is to think about death, or more to the point, to think about dying. So in many ways, this is also a poem about man's last mortal act, which is passing away. Given this, the poem is often taught as a grieving man's anger at death, which has come to take his father away. So the phrase "good night" refers to that, and where "good night" reference both how we say goodbye to people and how a dying person sleeps in the final sleep that they never wake up from. So, but more specifically, Thomas' poems tells about do not go gentle into that. Here, the word gentle means docile, or passive, or without any resistance, or just freely admitting yourself that you are dying. Thomas tells the readers they should not accept death passively, but instead should fight, or the proper term that Dylan Thomas used is the word rage against the dying of the light. But why is this exactly? Why fight against death instead of sleeping away peacefully? For Thomas, the best way is to face death and strength with strength and power, like the wild heroes of the old. In his poem, Thomas argues that this allows dying people to embrace the fire energy of life one last time, and in many ways serves a small way of triumph, something they have no control over in the end. If you can't avoid dying, it's better to go down fighting than to not fight at all. It's important to take note that although tells the readers to struggle against death, this isn't this isn't mean that we have the triumph over death. The end result of fighting death isn't about victory. The people in the poem don't cheat death in order to live another day. The truth is that people um, should always rage against the death. Thomas mentions that dying and everyone will die eventually. Thus, do not go gentle into the good night focuses on a person's literal final choice, not whether to not whether or not to die, but how they will face the inevitable. The second theme of this poem is the power of light. In the Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night, Thomas creates tension between that which he speaks about symbolically through images of night and darkness and life, which he represents through images of light. For example, take a look at the second line of the poem. When Thomas says close of day, he's referring death, but he also says that people should burn against it. And as we all know, things that are burning produces light. The act of putting two unlike things, the light and dark, is close proximity to another one called the juxtaposition. In this poem, the juxtaposition emphasizes the contrast between life and death. If death is dark and inevitable, then the juxtaposition helps readers see the life is powerful and full of energy. Let's take a closer look to the lines 7 and 8 to get a better understanding of how juxtaposition works. The lines, good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail days might have danced in a green bay. There are two instances of light imagery in these lines, bright and green bay. Water often appears to be green or blue on a sunny day. These words help describe the good man's life, um, which is full of energy and light. After all, even though his deeds are frail, which means minor or insignificant, in this instance, they still might have danced. In this passage, we can see how the living are full of vital, powerful energy. Through this, Thomas tells the readers that the true tragedy of aging and death is that it takes away the vitality of life. The third theme of the poem Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night is the limit of time. The speaker of Dylan's Thomas, Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night, is an anonymous narrator whose fathers die. We can say that Dylan's Thomas is the one who is narrating and he is the one who wrote this. It represents that anyone who lost their loved ones, uh, just like Thomas is experiencing, has experienced rather. But the speaker isn't the only character in the Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night. Each stanza of the poem features a different person at the end of his life. The wise man, the good man, the wild man, and the grave man. And at the last stanza is his father's own, Thomas' own father. In each stanza, the type of man mentioned is looking back at his life. He's reflecting on what he did and what he didn't do. In most of the stanzas, the man expressed regret on what they didn't do. For example, the wise man wore his words and have no fork, no lightning. In other words, the wise man, a teacher, a scholar, or some other educated person, worries that his ideas will not live on. Each of the other characters in this poem has their own unique way of regrets on the things they do not do and what they have left undone. So, Thomas includes the idea of regret in his poem to show readers how short life truly is. When we are young, we have grand plans for everything. We want to do what we want to say after. But Thomas argues that time goes by quickly. Too often, we grieve time on its way, which is Thomas' ways of saying that people often want to have time more and to move faster. But if we do that, we miss out the opportunities of life. Instead, Thomas is telling readers on a roundabout way that it's important to seize the day, carpe diem. Time is short, and death waits for us all, and death is inevitable. Thomas reminds us that we should always embrace life and we should not let it pass by. Moving forward, we have here some of the poetic devices used by Dylan Thomas in the Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night. Okay, the first poetic device used by Dylan Thomas is the villanelle. Again, poetic devices is a linguistic tool that the poet can use to help convey their message or their theme. So as we proceed, we have here the villanelle. What are the characteristics of a villanelle? It has 19 lines, it has 5 tercets, and concluding quatrain, and it must have 2 refrain and 2 repeating rhyme. So the first villanelle has to have 19 lines. More or less, the poem isn't a villanelle at all. The second one is it has 5 tercets, just like what you are seeing in the rightmost part of the screen. It has 5 tercet and a quatrain, which has 4 lines. A tercet has 3 lines. So the third is a villanelle must have 2 refrains and 2 repeating rhymes. A refrain is a set of lines that repeats itself in regular intervals throughout a poem, especially at the end of a stanza. In Thomas' poem, the lines do not go gently into the good night and rage, rage against the dying of the light are refrains. They are repeating. In Villanelles, the refrain comprises the last line of the poem. Repeating rhymes are the words that rhyme the same way. So, repeating rhymes occur throughout the poem, and a villanelle has two sets of poems to do so. In Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night, the rhymes are night, light, bright, flight, sight, and height. Ba rhymes are the B rhymes are they, bay, way, gay, and pray. Thomas uses a villanelle because villanelles often dealt with pastoral, natural, or sinful themes. In this cause, of course, this talks about death, which is kind of scary, but it is a natural part of life. It is happening. Since Villanelle deal with nature, it makes sense that Thomas chose to use that form to write this poem. Furthermore, repeated refrain echoes the way in which grief works. Even though we cannot know our loved ones can't escape death, our minds often find themselves returning to the possibility that they might not die. If only they fight a little harder, maybe they will live just a little longer. The refrain helps juxtapose the hope of the living against the inevitability of death. Thus, Thomas uses the villanelle to capture the death, which is like for a loved one too. The second poetic device used here is an enjambment. So what is an enjambment? So enjambment is the poetic technique where the line breaks in a poem happen in the middle of the sentence. When the line ends with a punctuation mark, it is called an end stop. Enjambment works as a way for poet to build both tension and motion. The tension comes from the fact that the poet's thoughts isn't finished at the end of the sentence. Each line with enjambment is a mini cliffhanger. Remember the word mini cliffhanger, and that what pertains to enjambment, which makes the reader want to keep reading to find out what's happened. Because readers want to keep enjoy reading, enjambment gives the poem a quick and sometimes frantic pose. It is almost like the poet cannot finish their thoughts fast enough. Sometimes enjambment can also create a drama, just like Dylan Thomas used in this poem. But especially when the following line isn't what the reader thought it would be. And do not go gentle into the good night. Enjambment happens in about half of the stanza. One good example here is how it works in the fifth stanza, where Thomas writes, Brave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like pictures and be gay. In these lines, enjambment creates drama and allows Thomas to play with words with a little bit. In the first line, the grave men can see with blinding sight, meaning they can look back on their lives and see how it extremes with clarity. But instead of telling us what the men see, Thomas twists things in the next line. When Thomas says blind eyes, he means literal blindness. In old age, people often lose their eyesight, like what's happening in our grandparents. But it doesn't mean they can see their past clearly into their own memories or into their own lives. So their memories blaze into their blind eyes. In other words, the joy of life will live reflect in their face despite having their old age. In this instance, enjambment creates the drama, and Thomas put an unexpected twist into his poem. And lastly, he reflects the rush of the excitement and joy of the great men feel in the structure of the poem. For instance, of the enjambment do not go gentle into the good night gives the poem a sense of forward motion, even though the speaker wants to stop time and as a result stop that both time and poem march toward the inevitable conclusion. So, as we proceed, let's go deeper into the origin, the meaning, and the usage of the following. The phrase, the origin of Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night appears four times in Thomas' dialect, The title itself appears four times in the poem. The speaker opens the poem with this phrase saying, "Do not go gentle into the good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the night." The speaker urges his father to struggle with death, which has upset the speaker for the decline of his father's health. He believes that those who cry have not shown much brilliance in life. Hence, if they can survive longer, they would be able to achieve more success. The second is the meaning. It means those who actually live out their lives would better see how life has been right for them before going towards the sleep of death. The speaker emphasizes the older men should fight fiercely and strongly against death. The purpose of fighting against death is to realize the importance of being alive. The poet believes the goodness comes from fighting against death with full force and might. So the usage of this poem convey the phrase conveys a powerful message that when death approaches, one needs to know what made his life meaningful, and he should never fear death. Thus, in everyday life, you can use it for encouragement, or like when a father or mother or grandmother is seriously ill and is about to die, then their children can give them strength by using this phrase. It can serve the same function, such as if someone is going to commit suicide but is sick on life. Let's move forward to the literary devices that was used in this one. The first is the metaphor. Goodnight is a metaphorical expression of death, obviously. Alliteration occurs in the sound of go in the go, gentle, and good, and the N in not and night. Where's the setting? Of course, it is in darkness or in night. Thank you for listening. That's all. And before I end, I just want you to remember that Dylan Thomas wants us to know that there's no wrong about raging against the dead. It is also our perception to rage against the dead, and we should not simply put ourselves into that pedestal of accepting that we are dying. Of course, it is also a reminder for us to live a good life and do not regret everything, just like the man from this poem did. We should always see how beautiful life is, and we should always talk about how these things works. Remember always that that should not always come into fear. And as a person living, it is our mandate to live our life with full of hopes, with full of bright and light. And when we reach that age, or when we reach the time that we're going to die, it is also our mission to rage against it. It's not about you want to live another day, but it's all about how you fight with the inevitable death. That's all, and I hope you have a good day, and thank you everyone for listening.